The Tom Woods Show, episode 801.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, I've just released another free ebook, this one called Education Without the State. Grab your copy at nostateeducation.com or by texting the word EDUCATE to 33444. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here, talking about a couple things today. I want to talk to G.P. Manish, who is a professor of economics at Troy University and who is an expert on development economics and on India as well. I want to talk to him about a couple of things. First of all, about development economics, that is, economics of developing countries and how you take developing countries and make them into wealthy countries. We're going to talk about that, but also given the fact that GP is from India and he has an expertise in the economic history of India, I also wanted to get him to comment on this item that's been in the news, and I've had a number of inquiries about it for the show, involving the demonetization of a couple of currency units. That is to say, the 500 and 1,000 rupee bills have been demonetized, and we're going to talk about the consequences of that. So a lot to talk about. GP holds his PhD in economics from Suffolk University. He's widely published. I'll link to some of his stuff at tomwoods.com/801. GP, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be with you again.
I actually thought of this topic because I was looking through and thinking back on the Mises University program of this year, and I thought I was not actually able to attend your session for some reason, and I wanted to. So I thought, well, the heck with it. I'll just have him on and have my own private seminar with him on this subject. And I know
Sure.
you've done some writing on India in particular,
Yes.
and you've had an interest in development economics, but the fact that you have an Austrian approach to it is interesting, because I had always just assumed that they're sort of like with labor economics, there isn't necessarily a uniquely Austrian position. But then I listened to your talk, and there are Austrian insights. First of all, what is development economics?
Well, development economics is really just a field of thought that addresses, questions regarding how do you promote growth and improving, living standards in those parts of the world which were sort of considered to be relatively underdeveloped, especially at the end of World War II. So this field really became prominent when a lot of countries sort of got their freedom from their colonial, masters, if you wish, towards the end of World War II in the 40s, and it's after that really the field emerged, when people in the West started thinking, okay, how do we help these countries develop and grow and become come close to the Western world, really.
Now, the consensus on development economics has been, maybe we might describe it as a bit of a pendulum over the years, because, of course, the initial consensus was very state-driven, and then the pendulum managed to swing back in the direction of Peter Bauer, whom you might say something about in a minute, and then now it seems like it has moved back a little bit more toward the original position. So can you summarize where it's been?
Yes, you're absolutely right in that description. So when it began in when the field emerged and became prominent, it was dominated by those who said, well, these developing countries, they need to impose huge amounts of regulation, if possible, socialism, and that's the way forward. It's through state action and state-driven action that countries were going to grow, because the key point there was those who were trying to talk about developing countries felt that we can't allow so much time to lapse for these countries the way in the West it took about 150, 200 years for this growth to happen. We want to have for this to happen rapidly. 20, 25 years. We want India and countries like that to catch up with the West. So the only way forward to do that is to have a lot of state-driven, economic policy. Well, that failed spectacularly in many parts of the developing world, and you had a reaction which is kind of linked to the election of Thatcher and Reagan and the economic reforms that they put forward in the Western world. So there was a movement towards more market reforms in the developing world. China is the famous example. India followed suit to a less extent in the 90s. And then now there seems to have been a sort of move back, especially with respect to issues like inequality and things like that, where there's a heightened criticism of what people perceive to be neoliberal dogma, where there's free market fundamentalism and things of that nature. And so some of those views are now gaining prominence again.
Would you say that Peter Bauer's criticism of state-led development programs was based on an analysis of institutions and the proper institutional framework? How would you classify his criticism?
Well, absolutely. I think Peter Bauer was one of the few who sort of bucked the trend, when development economics first rose to prominence. And in fact, he had a very high opinion of an Indian development economist, B.R. Shenoy, who was the father of Sudha Shenoy, who was an Austrian economist. B.R. Shenoy, in fact, studied under F.A. Hayek at the London School of Economics. In a sense, both of them and a few others bucked this trend, and they all criticized, especially this view that you have to have strong state-led action in order for these countries to develop. Another prominent critic, in fact, in those years was Milton Friedman, who went to India, I believe, in the 50s. And when he looked at all of these dams and all of these factories coming up, he said, well, these are like the modern pyramids. They're just monuments. They don't really have any value added from an economic perspective.
Well, the original argument seems to be that there's no way that the developing world was caught in a vicious circle of poverty. They didn't have enough wealth to invest to make capital investment, and their inability to make those investments kept them poor.
Right.
And so they were still poor, so they couldn't make the investments, and there was no way to break out of that. And that's why you needed other countries and other states to come to their rescue. That seems plausible. I could imagine the average person hearing that and saying, well, yeah, how could you ever break out of that circle? So how do they break out of that circle? Then we'll start talking about the Austrian points.
Well, this is Bauer's excellent point. He said, when he heard this argument, he said, hang on a second. The whole world was in this position at some point, right? So even the West, all of this growth and all of this development, you see these improving, living standards and increased quality and quantity of consumer goods that are flowing forth. All of this is very recent. We too were in this position. Well, somehow we broke out of this trap, correct? So just empirically, just looking at the history of those countries who you're trying to emulate, you should automatically feel that there's something wrong with this argument. The fact is that I think this argument became important and seemed very relevant because of this notion that this process must happen quickly. I think, even Mises talks about this, and I believe it's a key Austrian insight that really this process of growth might take time simply because it's funded, through saving, through investing. That's a slow process. But nevertheless, there is no trap here that we can, even if you have a low level of income, you can save and invest and add to the capital structure and gradually grow the economy over time.
Now, all these points that Bauer makes are points that any economist of any school of thought might make. But you're suggesting in some of your work that the Austrians have something unique to bring to this discussion. So what would be an example of that?
Well, I think the most unique thing the Austrians bring to this discussion is their discussion of the capital structure, the importance of saving and investing, and the intertemporal trade-off involved in the formation of new capital goods. And once you bring in this idea of a structure of capital, or a production structure, if you wish, that brings with it the importance of prices and a price system in order for entrepreneurs to be able to calculate and to be able to make meaningful resource allocative decisions. So in a sense, once the Austrian insight regarding capital and capital theory is imbibed, I think it gives a different focus to this to the idea of growth and development, and it really provides a very solid argument for why you must have private property as the institutional prerequisite for growth to take place.
Talk about the case of India in particular, because you have, of course, you're from India and you've also written on India.
Well, the Indian case was, India was again one of these countries that was trying to grow and catch up with the West when it became free of the British in 1947, and it followed many of the prescriptions given by economists, then development economists in the West, and we instituted a lot of 5-year planning, heavily regulated the domestic private sector in the economy. India didn't nationalize all its industries, though it did have a heavy public sector that did grow. The result of all of that was really not much growth, especially in the living standards of consumers. There was no growth in mass consumer goods, and whatever growth did occur was good. The goods were of poor quality. Things that you had also seen, though, on a larger scale in the Soviet Union, and then India in the 1990s effectively liberalized some parts of its economy, and has since then has grown much quicker, and the living standards, especially of those in urban India, have grown much faster than before.
Let's go back. Actually, I was talking about Venezuela a couple days ago on the show. I want to point out a comment you made in your talk at the Mises Institute. You were saying, I didn't realize that Joseph Stiglitz had, I don't know, did he actually visit Venezuela? And he said that, or did he just look at the data and he said, the growth looks really strong here. Now that is just, it almost reminds you of Paul Samuelson talking about how inevitable it was that the Soviet Union was going to overtake the U.S. in GDP and per capita and stuff. It's all ridiculous craziness. But is there something about his preconceptions as versus what an Austrian believes that made him particularly prone to or vulnerable to that kind of embarrassing error?
Well, it's this insight to do with the capital structure and the different view on growth that is present in the Austrian perspective. That's really missing from the view of Stiglitz and many other mainstream development economists, which is what leads them to make an error like that. So, in fact, what happens in a socialist or a heavily regulated economy like that of Venezuela or India or the erstwhile Soviet Union is really that you have a lot of, you can have growth. In other words, you can have the production of new capital goods, except that none of that really fits together, so that the whole, the capital structure doesn't fit together in a way that it brings out an increased flow of consumer goods in the future. And what happens as a result is that in the short run, it looks like GDP is going up simply because, yes, through coercive action, you're investing a lot in new factories, dams, and all these other sort of capital equipment. But really, at the end result of it is nothing much, simply because the different pieces don't fit together. And that's where the Austrian viewpoint, becomes so important, because it can explain in a way that, look, even when you have high rates of growth or relatively high rates of growth, that might be an illusion, right? In other words, you give up consumption now, you invest, but because your investments don't make any sense from from the viewpoint of they're fitting together to actually provide an increased flow of consumer goods in the future, you really don't get anything for all of that saving and investing. And in a sense, therefore, what happens to the capital structure in a heavily socialized economy is sort of similar to what happens in a business cycle, except that it's not driven by prices and in interference of the interest rates, because even in the Austrian theory of the business cycle, you have a capital structure that doesn't fit, that doesn't make sense, but that's because of the tampering with the interest rate. But here it's because of state-led efforts to grow the economy.
Can we step back a minute and have you explain just very basically what the concept of the capital structure is? And then secondly, what does it mean to have a capital structure that doesn't fit together?
Well, okay, so the capital structure, we could think of it in just the simplest scenario, like a Robinson Crusoe economy. So the capital structure really means what the Austrians mean when they say that an economy has a capital structure is really that you have a bundle of capital goods, right? So capital goods is not like this one homogeneous thing. It's a bundle of heterogeneous goods. So, for example, Robinson Crusoe, in order to, say, fish, he might first make an axe, right, a rudimentary axe, and then use the axe to, say, fell a tree and then get some fibers from it and make a raft and a net and then go fishing and get fish. So you see that here you have like a structure of capital goods which fit together, right? So he had to, for example, make the axe, and then he had to use the axe to make the raft and the net, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, that's a highly simplistic scenario. Now, a capital structure that doesn't fit would be, for example, Robinson engaging in the production of some capital good, like an axe or something of that nature, but also, but doing it in a way that it is not needed in the next stage of production. So, for example, in many of these heavily socialized economies, you would see, for example, the building of factories to produce machines, but then those machines aren't utilized for anything, for the production of any consumer goods, because the other complementary capital goods haven't been produced. Right, so that would be an example of a bundle of capital goods that don't fit together, simply because they don't all come together for goods to go from each stage of production to the next and down to the final consumer goods.
But if the state isn't somehow involved, how do these countries break out of the circle of poverty to engage in investment that yields them a sustainable capital structure?
Well, they have to have the institutions in place that effectively, protect private property. So you have to have a working price system, because it's largely through the price system that entrepreneurs, that they use the price system to calculate. That is, to make the calculations of prospective profits and losses, and then make their investments on that basis. That's one important institutional prerequisite. But there's also another important point that Mises brings out in Human Action. He talks about how the international capital market, in a sense, almost acts like a time machine. So the West, when it industrialized and when it developed, all the savings and investment had to come from localized, saving and investing, right? So when England, grew its capital structure and started started building factories in various industries and so on, the capital used there, the savings used were largely from the Englishmen themselves. But the developing countries, Mises points out, have access to capital from the West. And so in a sense, they can use that capital to then build their capital structure, right? And therefore, it's almost like they do not have to do, or the people there do not have to save and invest those funds in order to actually develop.
All right, I realize I'm trying to ask you a hard question here, and it sounds like I'm trying to get you to get inside the head of somebody on the left, and I'm not really sure how else to frame the question. But on the one hand, I hear constant complaints about so-called neoliberalism, which is their term for I don't know what. I mean, I guess they mean libertarianism.
Anything they don't like.
Exactly. and of course, neoliberalism always assumes there's a World Bank, an IMF, a Federal Reserve, central bank. Well, we're against all that, so I don't know what. But anyway, that's the only word they know. Neoliberalism is impoverishing the third world, and yet the only approaches to development that have worked have been in a free market direction. How do you make sense of what an incredible disconnect that is?
Well, I mean, in a sense, I would only say that some of the people on the left are almost flying in the face of all the facts of reality, right? I mean, for the neoliberal point, I think it's just a question of anything that I don't agree with is neoliberal, right, or is free market fundamentalist. Firstly, it's completely, I think, just crazy to think that an economy like India, for example, is some sort of free market utopia, right, or paradise or dystopia, whichever, depending on your political perspective. It's a highly, highly regulated economy where there are lots of regulations left over from its period of socialization. So in a sense, what people on the left are able to do is they're able to look at what's happening, right, and say to themselves, well, all the good stuff that's happening here would happen if we got socialism right, or if we got state action correct. So the problem with what happened in the past wasn't, something endemically wrong with state-led development or growth. It was just that we could do it better. Maybe we can have a better bureaucratic system in place, right? Maybe we can, do a few things different, and this will work this time. And at the same time, they're able to blame everything they don't like on these so-called phantom free market forces, because they completely ignore the fact that the world as it exists consists of these two realms, right? You have market forces at work, but you also have all of these interventions into the market, often from these very institutions that they believe are somehow promoting markets, such as the World Bank, the IMF, etc.
I want to talk about India for a minute. because of something that's in the news lately. But I've got two articles of yours from the Independent Review in front of me about India. Are these articles that the layman can read? Because if so, I'll link to them on the show notes page.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So one of them is called Central Economic Planning and India's Economic Performance 1951 and 1965.
Yep.
The other one is Market Reforms in India and the Quality of Economic Growth. I'll link to both of those at tomwoods.com/801.
Great.
Now,
yeah.
recently, as I just figured, as long as I have you on and you know about India, I would ask you about this.
Right.
There's an item in the news where in India they suddenly demonetized, as in made no longer legal tender, 500 and 1,000 rupee banknotes on the grounds, presumably, that we're going to crack down on money laundering, which, by the way, is the reason in 1969 they cracked down on big denomination bills in the U.S. There used to be a $10,000 bill. There used to be a $5,000, a $1,000, a $500. Those are all gone for the same reason. But they didn't just suddenly say – the way they did that was as those bills would make it to the Treasury would pay out smaller denomination bills and they would retire the larger ones. What did India do by contrast?
It's quite incredible. I don't think it'll even make it to the Onion. It's that incredible. What happened was just overnight, the Prime Minister announced that 500 and 1,000 rupee notes are no longer legal tender. So overnight, that is November 8th, and when you wake up November 9th, you find that whatever cash you held of those denominations no longer is money. And of course, so it was done. It was effectively. But they gave you a window till the 30th of December to actually go in and exchange your old notes for the new notes.
Okay, so what's the problem?
Well, the problem is that they didn't produce enough of the new notes.
No.
No, and it gets even better. Whatever new notes they did produce, right? So they want to replace these 500 and 1,000 rupee notes with really the new 500 rupee note, and they want to eliminate the 1,000 rupee note, and for some reason have a 2,000 rupee note. So what happened was the new 2,000 rupee note doesn't fit into the existing ATM machines. It's too wide, right? Plus, the banks didn't have enough cash to give out, right, in exchange. So the whole thing's been a mess. People have been waiting in line for hours and hours and hours over the last, month or so, trying to get this, money exchanged. And of course, it's highly regressive because effectively it has hurt those people who rely on cash. And by the way, 90% of transactions in India have estimated to be, cash-based transactions. So the level of banking and bank money, utilization in India is much, much lower than in the West. But most of those people, employing or using cash are the poorer people, right? It's really the middle class and the upper middle class and the rich who have access to bank accounts and use, bank-issued money.
All right, but let me jump in and ask you, what's the exchange rate with the dollar so we can get a sense of how big a 1,000 note is?
Well, so the 500 rupee note is approximately $7.50, and the 1,000 rupee note is about $15. But what's important is that while that doesn't seem, it's hard to get an idea just converting because those notes account for 86% of the cash in circulation.
Wow. So this is not like the $5,000 and $10,000 bill. No. Were not even really being used by anybody.
No. In fact, India did demonetize the 1,000 rupee note in 1978, but at that time it accounted for a very minuscule amount, of the overall cash in circulation. Since then, there's been a lot of inflation. So these two notes account for 86% of the cash in circulation, right? And overall, if you include, if you have a broader measure of the money supply, they actually account for 53% of overall money supply. So that's like taking away half. The money supply or 86% of the cash in circulation overnight without warning, right? So that's why I said it's quite incredible.
Well, so what have the consequences been so far?
Well, the consequences have been, and unfortunately, this is almost like a ready-made, example to illustrate Mises's point that money is non-neutral, right? That the changes in the money supply are non-neutral in that they affect different aspects or sectors of the economy differently. Unfortunately, this is a textbook example because overnight, you took away a large part of people's cash holdings or made it no longer legal tender. And what's happened is that it's affected different segments of the economy differently. So if, for example, you are tied into the banking system, so you're getting your wages and all your incomes are coming in through the banks, and you use a lot of debit cards and other other such devices for making your expenditures, your life is not that affected. And of course, this happens to be those who are middle class, upper middle class, and the rich. And they, moreover, can have the means to employ people to go stand in line for them to get their cash, that they had before, exchanged for the new notes. What's happened, on the other hand, is that the people who are poorer, the people in the rural areas, in the agricultural sector, in what is called India's informal economy, and collectively these sectors of the economy employ upwards of 3/4 of the workforce. These people have been effectively, their lives have been shattered overnight simply because they are more dependent on cash transactions, right, to make their both for income and expenditure, and they've been forced to stand in line just to get the cash required to make ends meet, and they can't afford to give up all that time not working, right, standing in line. So it's effectively transferred wealth away from the unbanked, or those who don't rely on the banking system, to those who do. So it's effectively highly regressive in nature.
Wouldn't this completely doom any politician who supported it?
Well, you would think so, but so far not. Largely because, so the goal of this whole exercise is to root out this thing called black money. Now, in India, what black money means is really unaccounted money. That is money that has been earned, but for some reason you've evaded taxes on it. And this thing called black money, especially amongst middle class Indians, the urban in urban India, etc., people are very frustrated with the amount of corruption they see, and so they think that something like this is a good step, that a bold statement to those who are corrupt and who don't pay taxes on their money or earn their money through illegal means. But what's important to note is that all this black money, of course, some of this money is being used to fund terrorism and all these criminal enterprises, but a large part of the money that is black is really a result of people trying to evade the existing controls that exist, right? Because India, remember, while it liberalized, did not liberalize a large part of many of the regulations they imposed in their socialist days. So many businessmen and others, both small and big, try to evade these controls, and therefore they keep their money. They therefore don't pay taxes on certain parts of their income, etc. So the way to get rid of the black money is to just deregulate, right? Remove ridiculous regulations. You don't need to demonetize 86% of the cash in circulation in order to achieve that objective.
Yeah, I can't get over this. This is just an absolute horror show for people.
Moreover, there are estimates saying that actually the amount of this black money or unaccounted money that's actually held as cash is only 6% of the overall amount, right? Because if you're not paying taxes on it and you might get caught, you don't keep it as cash. You invest it in luxury cars, in real estate, in gold, in jewelry. You put it in offshore bank accounts and things of that nature. So it almost seems like a political gimmick by the Prime Minister, Modi. Largely, I think his political calculation is that he will emerge, or he thought he would emerge as the sort of the champion of the middle class, the urban middle class, the rising urban middle class, who've all benefited from liberalization. And he will basically come out as a champion against corruption. Now, of course, given the way this whole episode is playing out, it's giving rise to all sorts of protests and from the opposition political parties, etc.
That's just awful. I don't know what to say. I can't believe this is happening. And you would think this also leads to greater uncertainty.
Absolutely.
I mean, it would seem like, why would I want to invest in India now? Who knows what crazy thing they'll come up with next?
And the way it undermines the faith in whatever money that, even the new notes, right? So people are beginning to think, or might begin to think, okay, what next? Which note will be, made non-legal tender? In fact, there are stories of villages in India basically resorting to barter, simply because a large part of these notes can only be exchanged in banks and post offices, but many Indians don't have access to banks, don't have bank accounts. so they can't, deposit these notes and exchange them, or they don't have IDs because you need to have government-issued ID to do that, but lots of them don't. So many of these people are just stuck with these notes, and overnight their lives have effectively been overturned. And now there's, in fact, even reports emerging of there being a black market in the old notes, right? So talk about, trying to eliminate corruption here. So people are trying, probably using these notes and using them at a discount, especially in, areas that are far away from banks, etc.
Well, here's the classic case of trying to fix the problems with one intervention with yet another intervention.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me something about the Johnson Center over at Troy University where you teach.
Well, the Johnson Center is a free market center. We have 8 scholars here. All of us are devoted to researching and trying to promote free markets through our research. We have an economics major program for undergraduates, and we have now a new master's program with 2 fields, both in public choice and Austrian economics. So a lot of content there for those who are interested in the thinking of people like Mises, Hayek, Rothbard, Buchanan, Tullock, etc. So I think we're hoping that to attract some great students.
So that's something to keep in mind for a lot of the young folks who write to me and say, where should I go to school, or I want to learn Austrian economics.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You should thank Troy, because you can study with GP, which is unbelievable. And, but there's a master's program there, too, which is also hard to find. Even
yes.
Grove City College, which I recommend to people, doesn't, they've had one in the works for years, but it hasn't been approved yet. You guys have that master's program. And seriously, and I'm not just saying this, if I were a young person and I had the opportunity to study with GP as my professor, I would jump at that. And not only that, how far away are you from the Mises Institute at Troy University?
Just about an hour and a half.
An hour and a half. Come on now.
Yeah.
Right? You can hang around with all the cool people at the Mises Institute. I mean, I think, look, go over to the Troy University website, get your application, and get rolling. GP, thanks for your time. Is there any other website or anything I can direct people to? I'm going to direct people to your articles. Anything else you'd like me to point them to?
I have a website, is gpmanish.com.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'll put that there. All right, thanks so much again for your time.
Oh, great to be on your show, Tom. Thanks a lot.
All right, a couple quick things. Remember, until December 30th, you can get the master membership at Liberty Classroom at a way, way reduced price. It's criminal. It's all the stuff I created for the Ron Paul curriculum, which is suitable for adults, by the way. I don't talk down to the people who are taking that curriculum, so you won't feel talked down to. Everything from Aristotle through World War II and beyond. If you feel like you have any knowledge gaps there that you're embarrassed about, I will fill them for you in just those. And that's just the bonus. The Ron Paul material is the bonus. The real stuff is the Liberty Classroom courses, which teach you the history and economics you did not get in school. It's taught by me and by other people I trust, and you can listen to it while you're driving your car. You don't even have to make extra time for it. Learn this stuff. Just kill it in debates from now on. Excellent, excellent, tremendous deal at libertyclassroom.com. But grab it before it goes away, because that is it. After December 30th, it goes back up, and I'm going to pretend this never happened. If you say, hey, Woods, I missed it, I'm sorry, I'm going to say, I don't even know what you're talking about. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about a lot of these vexing questions that libertarians have to deal with. Like, what about garbage removal? What about a lot of these services that we associate with the state we can't imagine being carried out any other way? How would we deal with them? And joining me to help sort all this out and explain it are the hosts of the Anarchitecture podcast that deals with a lot of issues just like those. So I hope you'll join me for episode 802 tomorrow. See you then.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.